dream that's shared by every American. A chance to make a good living, to raise a healthy, secure family, and then to leave our children with even more opportunity than we had. But look, the fact is we have gone through a tough time. And I know we've gone through a tough time here in Ottumwa. Even though our economy is growing again, even though our markets have rebounded, our businesses are beginning to create jobs again and hire again, that's all good news, but everybody here knows there's a lot of recovery that we still have to do. And I hear the stories in the letters that I get every night. Some of you know I take 10 letters out of the 40,000 or so that we get, and I read them every night. And recently I've received a particularly moving young letter from a young woman in a town that's smaller than Ottumwa. And she said, and I'm going to read this, our family has been able to make it through past financial hardship by sticking together and waiting patiently for things to get better, but I'm really starting to worry. That's what she said. I don't know how much longer I can deal with the guilt of putting additional financial strain on my family by trying to be the first of us to attend and graduate college. And she closed by writing, it's not your job to respond to me or even to read my letter, but I had to write her back and said, actually, that is my job. Because her story is just like the story of a lot of folks out here. That's why I asked you for the job in the first place, Iowa, because I was hearing too many stories like that. Think about that. Young woman feeling guilty about going to college. She's thinking maybe I need to drop out and work because my family's going through such strain. That's not the way it's supposed to be. She's supposed to take pride in going to college because she knows that it'll give her the opportunity to create a great life for herself, but also maybe to help folks who are less fortunate, a little bit less lucky, be able to reach back and bring them along. That's the dream that generations of Americans have worked for. And even before this last crisis, it felt like it was slipping away a little bit. Folks like you are living up to your responsibilities, and then you've got people in Washington and Wall Street who aren't living up to theirs. And the reason that so many of you joined our campaign was you believed that we had it within our reach to change the way things were working, to stand up to the special interests, to make sure that the agenda in Washington was yours, and to keep the American dream alive for our time and for all time. But before I take your questions, I just want to speak very plainly about what we've been doing to keep faith with that promise. And when I took office, the first thing we had to do was mount an aggressive response to the worst economic crisis we've seen since the Great Depression, because we didn't want a second Great Depression. And let's face it, some of the steps we took were unpopular. I didn't like them. Nobody wanted to have to fix the financial system. That wasn't part of what I ran on. I ran on making sure we regulated the financial system, but I didn't run on having to make sure it didn't collapse. But I also knew that some of the things we did were the right thing to do in order to make sure that the situation didn't get worse. And by the way, one of those steps was called the Recovery Act. And I want everybody to understand, here's what it did. First of all, 1/3 of it was tax cuts. We cut taxes for small businesses. So 1/3, when you hear the Recovery Act, I want you to understand, 1/3 of that went to tax cuts for small businesses, for first-time home buyers. Some of you have been first-time home buyers and gotten that $8,000 credit. For students and parents who were paying for college. And we cut taxes for 95% of working Americans, 1.1 million working families here in Iowa, because that's what I told you I'd do during the campaign. So in all, we passed 25 different tax cuts last year to help folks make ends meet in the tough economy. And by the way, that put more demand into the economy, which meant people had some money in their pockets to spend on basic necessities, which kept more businesses open and prevented us from slipping into a depression. So I just want to be clear, when you hear folks hollering about their taxes, I'm sympathetic, but we've cut taxes. 25 of them. All right, so that's a third of the Recovery Act. Another third went to helping folks get back on their feet by extending unemployment benefits and making COBRA cheap. And I can't tell you how many people I talk to. It's tough enough losing your job. It's a lot tougher if you lose your job and your COBRA payments, the payments to keep your health care from when you were on the job, are more than you can ever afford. So then you lose your health care at the same time as you're losing your job. And the COBRA basically subsidized 65% of those costs, and it meant a lot of people, even when they lost their job, were able to keep their health care and through unemployment benefits keep the lights on until they were able to get back on their feet. We also kept teachers and police officers on the job, including right here in Iowa. If you talk to any governor, they will tell you that they would have had to make huge layoffs if we hadn't provided help. All right, so that's two-thirds of it. Now here's the last third. It was towards putting people back to work, doing the work that America needs. That wind blade plant that we just went to, they benefited from clean energy tax credits that we gave them. They would not have been able to expand and hire those additional 200 people if we hadn't provided those tax credits. All across America, we invested in rebuilding roads and bridges and hospitals and firehouses, laying broadband lines, creating and harnessing the clean energy of tomorrow. So it was that Recovery Act that helped that wind turbine plant boost output. Not far from here, the Recovery Act is funding the Ottumwa Job Corps Center, offering a brighter future for hundreds of students a year. Now, sometimes you've got people who are critics of what we did, but they'll show up at the ribbon cutting. So I just want to make clear here what we did, because people try to score political points by attacking the Recovery Act. That's what they're attacking. That wind turbine plant, or that wind blade plant, the Job Corps Center, keeping teachers on the job, the most progressive tax cut in our history, relief for laid-off workers, investment in your community. 2.5 million Americans went to work today who otherwise wouldn't have gone to work. And we're going to keep on working by every means necessary to accelerate job creation, because, look, a job is more than a paycheck. Anybody who's been out of work, and by the way, I've been out of work, knows that feeling you get when you're out of work. It's not just because you're worried about paying the bills. It's because a job is about meeting one's responsibilities and taking care of one's family. It's about the satisfaction at the end of a hard day's work, the sense of purpose and pride every American deserves. That's what we need to restore. So that's been our priority in the short term, to get our economy running, getting businesses hiring again, and we're making some progress. Not as fast as I'd like, but the trends are good. Here's the thing, though, folks. The challenge did not just begin a year and a half ago with this crisis. It certainly didn't start here in Ottumwa just a year and a half ago. We've been seeing manufacturing leaving. We've been seeing folks who are struggling to get by, middle-class folks who've been swimming against the current for the better part of a decade because they were hit with the economic tidal wave. For decades, our schools have been failing too many of our kids. For decades, our dependence on foreign oil threatened our economic and national security. For decades, families have been struggling with out-of-control health care premiums. For decades, our deficits, well, actually just a decade, our deficits were unacceptably large year after year, because 10 years ago, we actually had a surplus.